Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Vox Sola, the 21st episode of Season 1. This episode was written by Fred Decker, based on a story by Rick Berman, Brannon Braga, and Fred Decker. It was directed by Roxanne Dawson, and it aired on May 1st, 2002. Which is exactly 20 years ago to the day of our recording, which I think is pretty cool, Abby.
It is cool.
But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
Thank you, Lieutenant Reed. There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of Enterprise at any time. And now for a summary of the episode, let's hear Abby's captain's log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog supplemental.
All right, here's my summary of Vox Sola. When a very alien creature boards Enterprise and captures several crew members, it's up to the rest of the crew to come together and figure out how to communicate.
Okay, it's time to deploy our subspace amplifiers and get into this episode. Abby, I'm so happy that we have arrived at Vox Sola. This has always been one of my favorite episodes of Season 1. It really stands out. So I'm looking forward to discussing it and really curious about your impressions. What did you think?
All right. Well, I'm excited to talk about this one too, because there's a lot here. And when you think that it was 20 years ago that they were doing this, it's even more impressive because I think some of the themes still resonate really loudly right now and kind of sync up with what a lot of modern sci-fi is doing in regards to communication and understanding people who are different than yourselves. Well, creatures, aliens, anyone who's different than yourself. So let's start with that theme and talk about my favorite way to start any pod, the cold open. So, all right, we have the Cretaceans, and we have to mention that here is our favorite Admiral Forrest, played by Vaughn Armstrong, playing a Cretacean who is pretty much the opposite of our beloved Admiral. So how fun to see him get to do something else. And if I didn't know it was him, I wouldn't be able to tell even from the voice because I was trying, and that's the mark of a good actor. So double thumbs up right there to him first thing.
Yeah, love seeing Vaughn Armstrong again, and I had forgotten it was him. So I see what you mean about it's kind of hard to tell. And this is a really interesting cold open, Abby, because it's so intense. Things are not going well. And I love when Hoshi says they want to leave and T'Pol says, well, that much is obvious.
Yes, the humor is rubbing off.
And Abby, I know that you are thinking this in your brain because I know you well, but the costuming, the beadwork, that beadwork, the outfits,
I know,
the hair, the faces, the prosthetics, the purple stuff, pretty darn cool.
Yeah, this episode has absolutely incredible costuming. And I think it's interesting, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get further in, but we see a much larger variety of costuming on this episode. We see off-duty clothes, we see uniforms, we see the Cretaceans, but you know when they start off with an alien that is that detailed in the first few seconds that this is going to be a good episode for us costume nerds out there. So yes, absolutely gorgeous, and was almost my Porthos pick for this one. So I'm glad that we brought it up right away. And I also want to bring up that this is the first time that we see our mysterious alien, the creature, the life form, however you want to call it. And I have to say, this was the first time I thought this, but as soon as I thought it, I couldn't stop, that this came out almost the same time as the movie The Muppet Christmas Carol. And there is a kind of creepy looking ghosty thing in that movie too. And I went, hey, wait, that's kind of the same effects. Now, not up close when you see all the slime and like the little holes and all that, but when you see it crawling on the ship or moving and it looks more wispy than gooey, I was like, ooh, that must be the special effect that everybody was into that time of the year, because that must have been that early 2000s visual effect, but it's beautiful. And that creeping in the airlock right before it closes, ooh, that is a nice little mini cliffhanger at the end of this cold open.
Most definitely. And also, just jumping ahead a tiny bit, when Hoshi puts her ear to the wall and you see the creature on the other side of the wall, that was a really neat camera shot. I love the effects of this creature / alien. I mean, maybe it was 20 years ago, but I think it holds up. And I think it really painted a picture of the sliminess. And when you see it kind of sliding and moving later, I thought the effects were really well done, along with the beautiful music that I know we'll talk about.
Yes.
I think that this episode has a really nice classic sci-fi, proper sci-fi feeling. The alien aspect of this episode, whether you want to call it Monster of the Week or whatever, I thought was really, really well done.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the reasons it stands out for me overall this season, is because it is that classic almost mix of horror tint into sci-fi, because there's some real creepy shots in this. Like when you see them coming down to the cargo bay, we're shooting through the monster and seeing the doors open, which is the most classic horror movie shot ever, to shoot through the monster. And not that this alien is a monster, but that callback to a shot like that, and the music, which is just, if you listen for it, especially if you listen on headphones, which I did one of the times I rewatched this, you hear the theme for the creature, for the life form, just playing in the background in all these different ways. And it's slow and it's subtle and it builds throughout the episode. And that was an absolutely gorgeous touch. So the mood of this episode is just intense, but it also has the problem solving aspect of it that I like about a lot of sci-fi, where it's like, okay, we have this really crazy problem and this life form, this need, this issue. We're going to come together and do smart stuff together and figure it out. And that's the kind of sci-fi I like.
Abby, I'm in 100% agreement with you. I love that kind of sci-fi also. And I think that this episode really nailed it. I know for some people, this feels like a bit of a slow episode. And I can respect that. But for me, the pace works. I think it sets a really interesting tone and atmosphere with the music building at the end. Just beautiful. And I have to say, Abby, I love this moment where after the cold open and Hoshi and T'Pol are having their conversation, and T'Pol says to Hoshi, try to learn from failure. you know that she means well. And Hoshi's like, thanks. That's her answer. I thought that was slightly comical moment.
I did too. And I think it was very much in character for both of them. And one of the first examples of absolutely exquisite face acting on both of these two women in all the scenes they have together this entire episode. And we'll talk about that too. But wow, they have the close-up shots down on this one.
Oh, yes. And I know we'll get to it later, but there are definitely looks between them during this episode where they are looking at each other and where they know what they're talking about, but they are like, wow. Can we just say how cool it is that Porthos picks up on the fact that there's something going on here?
1,000,000,000%. Porthos is always on top of everything and looking out for his best friend, the captain. So what more could you ask for? So let's move on to when the alien first starts the takeover of everybody. So I had to laugh as I'm watching our secondary characters here, who are literally wearing red engineering stripes on their shirts. Poor Kelly and Rostov. They're the red shirts of this episode who are going to get. Now, they do survive, thank goodness, but they're the ones who are hanging out in that goo for the longest amount of time. And I liked that we saw this little back and forth between them. I like that we saw that they were friends, that it's not just, our usual senior staff on the crew who are solving these problems. This is, the people who actually keep things functioning, but they still want to go to movie night too. And I liked that little bit of development, and it meant more when you saw them then in the creature, either conscious or unconscious, because we just had that brief little introduction and seen them as people. So red shirts, yes, but I felt for the one, episode that we've seen these characters, we got some decent development at first.
I always like to see lower decksy type of people and not the main cast, and find out, what's going on in the ship while the senior staff is doing their thing. So it's always nice to see the other crew members. So I agree. I enjoyed that as well. And I think it did make it more meaningful.
And before we leave this portion here, I just have to say that I've never seen the movie Wages of Fear that is discussed and shown as movie night choice for this episode, but I kind of want to now. I mean, after listening to everybody describe it and, bad French accents and all of that. So interesting. And I like that they are picking these old classic films. Even for us, they are old classic films. I'm sure there's some sort of movie or entertainment that's much more modern. I mean, they got the finals of the water polo match through Subspace, but they're choosing to go back to older classics. And that's always kind of a nice little thing in there. And I have to point out that this movie scene at the beginning here, again, the casual costuming is so neat. And seeing Archer and Trip in their casual clothes, while I do think maybe they did that so they didn't have to get goo all over one of their uniforms, I liked seeing it. And they're interesting. And their clothes, again, which I really appreciate that Enterprise does every time, it's not the sci-fi otherworldly fashion that you see in some of the other Star Treks that take place later on. This is a bridge from where fashion and clothing and trends are kind of now to that. And you see that connection, and I always appreciate it. And the person that was sitting next to Reed with the cool little shirt with the stripes across it, I would wear that. So just bravo one more time to the costume people. And Trip's shirt is neat too. It's got purple down the back of the sleeves. I mean, this was well thought out, well fitted, interesting, fun costuming.
Yeah, I didn't notice Trip's purple part of his shirt, so I need to check that out. I hear you, Abby. I think it's great. And I love these movie nights that show them kicking back. I really enjoyed the scene with Trip and Archer kicking back with the beer and the pretzels.
Yep.
And that was a really nice bonding scene. Also, Trip being so empathetic, knowing that Archer needed to be cheered up because his first contact went so badly. I loved that scene a lot. And I really liked Trip's line about, unless you're too busy with your brown dwarfs. That's a great line and very Trip. So that was a nice scene.
Yeah, I really enjoy when we get to see these moments of their true, actual friendship, because we see them a lot having just flashes of it and glimmers when they're in the command structure or in missions and things like that. But it is fun to see them off duty and just hanging out the way that you do with people you enjoy. And good thing they have each other on this ship, because there's not a ton of people. So you need to have somebody that you can lean on and talk with and who understands what you need with those moods and things. And I liked how he asked T'Pol, how's his mood? What's going on? And she knows him well enough now to say, yeah, you might want to leave Archer alone for a little bit. But he goes in anyway because he's thinking to himself, I'm going to go in as a friend. He didn't go in as a commander. He went in as a friend. And that is heartwarming. And that is part of what we're almost at the end of season 1. These guys have been out there for a while. They've learned each other's tics. They live with each other. They hang out with each other after work because there's no other options. They do start to know each other. I mean, and I was even noticing, pet peeve of mine, talking with your mouth full. Here's Malcolm off duty, eating the prime rib. And which, by the way, ding, ding, more Enterprise food. Love it. And even the fresh horseradish. But I think it's really interesting how he's obviously very formal, stiff and all that, but we see Malcolm relaxed a little bit here with Hoshi and with Travis. He's talking with his mouth full, which he would never do if he was eating with Trip or Archer or T'Pol or any of that. So it's interesting to see them more relaxed, and it's fun to see that throughout the entire ship with lots of different people throughout this episode.
Yeah, that's a good observation of that nuance. I also noticed that while they were eating, you could tell that Malcolm and Travis were concerned that Hoshi was feeling badly.
Oh, yes.
Just through those, facial expressions. And you know that they're all friends. And I love their camaraderie and I love them supporting each other. So that was a nice scene also.
It is a nice scene. And I like them because they're kind of the lowest of our senior officers. So, of course, they would hang out and pal around a little more. And I liked seeing them both non-verbally, but obviously checking in with each other. Yeah, we're trying to cheer up Hoshi, right? Okay, and the little joke about, hey, you like this movie, there's explosions. And then looking at her, not really looking at Malcolm. That's what friends do.
Absolutely. So let's talk about our people are ensnared in the creature now, and Phlox is getting involved, and we're communicating with Phlox and figuring out this first attempt of stunning the creature. What are your thoughts on that part?
So I have to say that I really enjoyed Phlox in this episode when he's examining the tentacle and trying to get more information from it all the way through till the end. I think Phlox is, with the exception of a few little blips here and there, one of the most consistently written characters of season 1. I mean, we know he is alien to the humans himself. We know he's been on multiple planets, interacted with many species, had more experiences out in the galaxy than our crew has, but he doesn't hold it over them and he doesn't make them feel poorly about their choices. But he gives the information in a way that they understand. He gives the information when they need to. And he's got that spine of steel that comes up. We know he's happy. He's empathetic. He's almost jolly sometimes. But when it comes down to it, he is very serious about his ethics and himself as a doctor and as a denobulin and as a person or as an individual. And that is amazing that he has that from the get-go. And I like that a couple times this episode, he sees something or notices something that immediately he knows is bad news or good news or something that they need to know. But he's constantly bringing it back to something that the people he's talking to would understand and have more of a frame of reference on. Like saying, this is like an earthworm. You can cut part of it off and it's still functioning. That's something that they could connect to and understand. And while I know that's done mostly for plot exposition for us, the audience, it's nice to see, and it's in character to see that Phlox would do that for his crew members as well.
Well said, Abby. Phlox really shines here for all the reasons you just described. And I really think there's some effective stuff that happens here when he talks about the linked nervous system and about, that's no earthworm. He's deadly serious here and really making good connections, like you said. And that does add to the creep factor when you think about this linked nervous system and what is happening with this alien really needing that connection. It's so intriguing where this alien has to connect with others. The nervous systems are linked up. Our people are dying. So the stakes are really high. This is life or death. They are in serious jeopardy, and we want to do everything we can to help them. But at the same time, for me, the episode does make you empathize with the alien and what it's going through also and wanting to help it as well. And during this scene, did you notice how emotional Malcolm is throughout this episode? He's very...
Yes.
I don't want to use the word reactive, but he has strong feelings, starting with this scene when he's challenging T'Pol. And I just found it interesting that, Malcolm is obviously very concerned about his friends and team members, but he definitely has very strong reactions in this episode. And that brings us to the Phlox and Malcolm part, which I absolutely adore. I love that Phlox sticks to his ethics. I really like the way he explains to Malcolm that he is the ranking officer in the sick bay. Very good point. And, Malcolm has to go along with it at the end, respectfully as he can. He clearly doesn't agree, but I thought that was a powerful and very well done scene.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed The camera angles and the physicality that the two actors did in that scene. I mean, they're acting over a tentacle in a tube. This is not, the most responsive scene partner, but they keep glancing back at it and then at each other. And again, the small nuances of the acting here is great. And as this scene goes on, they get just a little bit closer and closer and closer to each other until finally Phlox puts his hand over Malcolm's little EM emitter and puts the smack down, does the mic drop moment. And I just think it's so Phlox, because when you get to the point where Phlox puts on his serious voice and all that cheerful demeanor is gone, you are at a point you are not messing with. And I think that Malcolm really understands that. And what I think is interesting about Malcolm in this scene too is this is like we said, near the end of the first season, they have real relationships now. The stakes here are high to him in a way that they were, but they weren't at the beginning of the season. Of course, we have said over and over again, Malcolm Reed is good at his job. Malcolm Reed does his job. He is exactly who you want in this position. But now I think is the time where he starts to realize, yes, he is, the ranking officer. He would do this for anybody else, but it's that much more devastating to him that this happened on his ship to his captain and his friend now, Trip, that there is that level of emotionality that we let him see crack the surface a little bit. And that's really moving.
Absolutely. Abby, I want to talk about the crew members being trapped in the goo for a moment. And I thought they did a really fantastic job conveying the panic that I know for myself I would certainly be feeling. The way that the panic was escalating, which is completely understandable considering that they were being squeezed and pulled and, being linked telepathically and everything that was happening. And Abby, I absolutely love, here's Archer with his great captaining again, the way that he calms the people down, the way that he gets them to reduce their panic, another strong, amazing quality about Jonathan Archer, and also a lot about how he thinks. And I love that in the moment he was able to do that. And that is his job.
Yeah, I think it was a wonderful moment of him as a captain and as a friend and just as a man. There's a lot of insight in these little blips. And I know people have really made fun of the water polo thing, but I think this was a really nice way to integrate it and bring it in and make him unique and get some character development. And you get the classic line, and I don't know anything about water polo, which is still funny to this day to me every time, even in this serious scene. And I like how they all realize that, this could be it. We're making cracks about, Zephram Cochrane. Hey, I don't think you expected this. And they're keeping that humor, but they're also all starting to be linked. So if one of them gets anxious, they all do.
Yes.
And that's a powerful thing. And that's interesting that even in all this, even when they can pretty much read each other's minds, Archer is calm enough and put together enough to do this for everybody and to keep checking in on the unconscious crew members too. And that's important because, I mean, poor Rostov, who's go down there looking for Kelly and she's still breathing. And he gets props from me because he was the first one sucked into the goo and he lasted almost the longest. I mean, only Trip was around a little bit longer than he was. So good job for him.
Definitely.
So one of my favorite scenes in this entire episode is when Travis is the one who has to give the apology to the Cretaceans. I think this is a lovely moment for Anthony Montgomery. And the moment where the hail comes back, they answer the hail, and he looks around the bridge and there's like nobody there. It's a ghost town. His face is perfect. And I know that everybody is just off to the side or in a little bay or something. He could have called somebody, but he didn't. And he did such a lovely job. And all the intonations and his natural instincts in this conversation are just spot on. And thank goodness we have this boomer there at our helm who could step up and do this because it was so genuine and so heartfelt and just a fun little exchange in this episode.
Abby, I'm with you. And I just have two things that made me smile and then I'll comment. First of all, the Cretaceans sure learned English fast. And secondly, I did think of you because we've talked about this before. Where are those bridge replacement people?
I know, especially they talked about leaving stuff for the night shift earlier this episode. Where are these other people?
That made me laugh. Anthony Montgomery did a great job. This is a lovely moment in the episode. The way he apologizes, the way he thinks on his feet, sorts it out, explains to them what the organism is. He cuts to the chase, handles it by himself. Great scene.
So let's talk about the actual rescue here, how they go in and they've got the now working force field. Woohoo, Malcolm Reed again. And then let's talk about Hoshi, who has figured this out. She and T'Pol have cracked it, and we'll come to that in a little bit, the two of them together. But this was a nice rescue. This is, years before we've seen any of the modern sci-fi that's about communicating with aliens that are so much different than we are. They did this. They figured it out. She did it. And what a nice way to see that it was talking it through and that there was no hostility intended here. It was simply the alien going, well, I don't know how else to communicate with them except absorbing them and figuring out what they know to try. And it was a really nice resolution. And I liked how many people came together to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, by taking Trip and Archer sort of out of the main part of the episode, it does allow our team to shine, to see other people doing things, to see combinations of people doing things. And I will tell you, Abby, this is where it hits home for me. This is why, one of the reasons why I love this episode so much. So I'm about to get schmaltzy here, but
go for it.
This whole way they do this with the communication and the tones and the pinging with the alien is so beautiful and so emotional and so cool. And every time I see this episode, no matter how many times, that first time that the creature screeches back and the tones and the pings, I always get choked up. And then we have T'Pol and Hoshi looking at each other, feeling like, wow, we did this, and the whole communication piece and what they're communicating with the amazing music. This is some potent stuff for me. I love it.
Yeah, it really is one of the reasons that I think, to borrow a phrase from our friend Chris, who says, why Voyager? This is for me, why Enterprise? Like, you get those moments where it is about things that are so different and coming together and figuring them out. And this episode was just a beautiful mix of that. And it makes you want to see more. And that's the most that you can ask for any type of media like that. So we would be remiss if we did not talk about Hoshi and T'Pol's relationship in this episode. And I think this is the perfect time because we were talking about them giving each other the looks when they're behind the force field and communicating. But I have to say, this is a relationship that I really enjoy. I like the two strong women together. They're not afraid to speak their minds. They're both, as much as Hoshi's an anxious character, she's a strong character because she always ends up standing up for herself in all of it. And I know we have all felt like Hoshi in this episode, where there's somebody who you respect and you want that respect back and you feel like you're not getting it, whether it's a friend, it's a coworker, it's somebody higher up that's managing you or assessing you or something. We've all been there. And I think I give Hoshi massive props in this episode for saying something to T'Pol. She tried, she was professional, but she finally did. She just let it out because so many people never do. And then it turned out not to be at all what she thought it was. Like, T'Pol is doing this because T'Pol does respect her already and thinks she's the incredible woman we all know her to be. So what a nice little mind shift for Hoshi. And I in my head have heard people say, oh, this isn't look their relationship. Think about when they were on the Klingon ship and Sleeping Dogs, and they had this moment. And she said, when we get back to the ship, I'll show you. Well, my headcanon for this always was Hoshi's waiting for T'Pol to invite her to do this, and T'Pol is waiting for Hoshi to say something else to her, and it never happened. And that's one of the reasons that Hoshi is so frustrated in this episode, is because they had that moment and then there was no follow through because T'Pol just didn't even realize. And that could be completely my own head. But that's how I read it. Like that they had this the beginning that was contentious. They had a bright spot and now they're kind of back in that contentious. And that is how relationships really work. I mean, it's not always, slow, steady growth without any dips. Nothing with two different individuals in a relationship is linear. And I liked that. And I really enjoyed them coming together at the end of this and putting those brains in motion and working it out and having that unspoken communication again, because I think that they aren't going to go back in the weeds after this. It might not ever develop in these 4 seasons the way that I really wished it would have, but they're never back to that. I don't think she trusts me. I don't think she respects me point.
Yeah, those are great points, Abby. I do think that this non-linear relationship that you're discussing, it is more realistic to the real world. You're right. That's how relationships are. And I think because they are in such a time crunch with such high stakes, it adds to Hoshi's anxiety here of needing to get this done so quickly. And I love the way that she speaks her mind to T'Pol also. And the way T'Pol quickly adapts. T'Pol figures out very quickly where Hoshi's coming from. So she can craft her answer in a way where she can make her point known while also supporting Hoshi. So I really enjoyed this scene as well. And I thought it was really great character work for the two of them.
Yeah. And the last little thing is I love watching the two of them with the pads and the screens all in front of them. And they each have their mug of something and they're sipping and they're working, because that was just, and you know what? This was 20 years ago. And here's two women making the breakthrough. So that in itself says something. And the fact that we notice that and think about that 20 years later also says something. But I love that Enterprise was not afraid to let their women be smart and solve the problem.
Woohoo! I completely agree. And how cool is it when you really think about how alien this creature is to them and how this language is based on mathematics and all this other technical stuff that I don't, quite get. How cool is it that within 3 hours, they were able to communicate with this alien? That is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, their brains are humongous. Good job, ladies. So let's talk about these two fabulous crew members and the rest of the people who take our life form back to the planet, the gigantic one life form planet, which is such a mind-blowing concept when you think about that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one would hope an asteroid doesn't hit you like right in the solar plexus of wherever your body is on the planet.
Aww.
But that's just me. So to me, this last scene felt like an epilogue. Like if you're reading a book and they had this big grand adventure and it all kind of wraps up and you get your happy ending, but then you get the little more, the closing of all the pieces, the gaps, and tying up all loose ends piece. And they seem like they almost were setting it up like it could be more, and like an epilogue. Here's the end of how things happen, but there could be more story here. And I always wish that there was more story about really aliens like this one. And please tell us, we are not Star Trek Online people, but we've found out through our wonderful listeners that some of these aliens do show up in there. So if this alien is anywhere in there, please let us know, because I always kind of wondered more about it. And it seems so different and so fascinating. Somebody's got to be out there communicating and exchanging information.
That would be cool to know more. I do think for me, Abby, this is the connective piece, no pun intended, to the communication scene. Because after the communication scene, I'm on such a high emotionally because of how powerful this is for me. And then to have this end scene with its set design of this homeworld that is so atmospheric and creepy and mysterious and awesome, and with this life form joining itself, everything about it, and the way the shuttle pod flies away and you get that pullback scene, this just added on to the wonderfulness of that previous scene for me. I thought it was very effective and really well done. And it left me at the end feeling like, wow, that was some great sci-fi. I love the atmosphere of this scene.
Yeah, I know that our friend Jim Morehouse over on Trek Ranks has debated about doing an episode that's all about Star Trek episodes with a mood. This is one of those episodes that would go on that list if he ever does it, because the whole mood wraps around from the very beginning when you see that alien come through the hatch to the end where it all goes back together on the planet and you see that shot. And that the mood does not let up for 1 second during this episode. So it is a beautiful way to end it.
Okay, it's time for Porthos's pick. Abby, what's your favorite part?
All right, so this is a little bit more nebulous than my usual Porthos picks, but I have to say my favorite part of this episode is how we see everybody do something important and vital and interesting and character building in this episode, and we see them in interesting combinations. I mean, we have Malcolm, Travis, and Hoshi in the mess hall. We have Malcolm and Phlox later on. We get the really nice scenes between Archer and Trip. We get tons of Hoshi and T'Pol. We get T'Pol and Malcolm and Hoshi. We get all sorts of people in all sorts of different ways. And this showcases our family on the NX-01 that just resonates with me and feels good to me. And this is where I feel season 1 really clicked in. I mean, we were talking before we recorded about how this is the part of the fun part of the season. Then there's a bunch of good ones. And this is why, because they're getting to know their characters. They're getting to know their actors. Everybody's comfortable and they can make a beautiful piece of science fiction that showcases everyone doing interesting, smart things with each other. So I have to say all those combinations and our whole crew being featured is really what makes this episode for me.
Great pick. I can't add to that. The teamwork is just fabulous and another strength of this quality episode. My favorite part is the Archer quote while they are entangled and integrated with the alien and they're talking about water polo as we discussed. I absolutely adore the Archer quote, as soon as you give up, the game is lost. And it's very simple and maybe it's cliche. I don't care. I think it's a very powerful message. Every time I hear him say it, I love it because it is a great message and it really does define Jonathan Archer's mindset. It says a lot about who this guy is, that's how he thinks. And when Trip says something about going back to senior year of college or whatever, it also tells us that he's thought this way for a while. He's always had this type of cup half full mentality. And that's partly what helps get them through that. And I just think it's a really poignant quote. I like the way it was wrapped up with the water polo, and that's my favorite part.
Yeah, it is a beautiful standout moment. And the way it's delivered by Archer to Trip and the way Trip receives it is a beautiful moment too, and just speaks to how genuine that is and that it's a core part of Archer forever.
Accessing library computer data.
Okay, Abby, it's time to share some trivia. What can you tell us about Vox Sola?
All right, I have 2 quick little ones today because I couldn't decide and they're both really interesting. So the first one, the device that Malcolm uses to make the force field, which, woohoo, first guy to ever make a force field fully work. Bravo again, deserves all the gold stars. But what he uses consists partly of several of the earpieces that were used by Lieutenant Uhura in the original TOS. So that's super cool. And once you see it, you're never going to unsee it. So sorry if I ruined and pulled anyone out of that scene, but I think that's interesting. And my second one is that the dialogue between T'Pol and Hoshi when they're working together is the first on-screen confirmation that T'Pol is Enterprise's first officer in addition to the science officer, which we'd kind of seen and figured out and inferred from all the other times that Archer leaves her in command and she outranks Trip and all that. But this was the first on-screen confirmation.
Oh, very interesting. I like that. And Abby, I cannot believe that is so cool that they actually used props from the original series. I have to go back and look at that force field device that he stuck on the wall because I want to see Uhura's earpieces. That is super cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My trivia actually wraps into yours, so it's a bit of a reiteration, but another woohoo from Malcolm that this is the first time that a force field is used on an Earth ship, and that's a pretty huge milestone in the history of Starfleet. So commendable for Malcolm for working on that on his own as a little side project hobby.
One wonders if they actually have it named Malcolm Reed Force Field and everyone just ignores that first part.
That would be neat.
Transfer of data is complete.
Well, we know what that means. We've arrived at our Vulcans Verdict on a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers. Abby, how are you rating Vox Sola?
All right. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone who listened to me talk up to this point that I really enjoy this episode. I enjoy the alienness of the creature. I love the way the entire crew gets spotlighted. And I love that the solution is something that Star Trek is doing to this day. The solution is smart people being smart together. And I love it. And I would rewatch this one over and over. So this one gets a 9 out of 10 grapplers for me.
I'm with you, Abby. Between the theme of this episode, which is the communication piece with a very, very alien creature, the teamwork, the atmospherics, the visual effects, the message, just all of that wrapped up together makes this a super high quality episode. And again, also gives me that poignant, emotional, powerful punch. So once again, we matched this week. I also gave Vox Sola a 9 out of 10 grapplers.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
Okay, it's time for Daniels to send us back in that timeline so we can hear from you. Abby, what do you have for us tonight?
So I have something a little bit special tonight. I want to remind people while we primarily interact on Twitter, we are out there on a lot of different places. We are on Instagram and we are on the Tricorder Transmissions YouTube feed. And we are also on Facebook. And recently there, we have had somebody pop up who has given us heaps of kind feedback and is giving us a little bit on every episode she's listened to thus far. And we wanted to just point out our new friend, Monique Wistaff, and thank her for all of the feedback and feature one that she wrote about the episode Fusion. So here's what she says. I totally agree with you that Talaris' predatory story overshadowed the fact that those Vulcans seemed to be really onto something that would have been interesting to develop further, something that could have been interesting for T'Pol. After all, Tevin and Kove seem to have found a balance. I found that sad that T'Pol had to judge them based on Talaris' actions. So we talked a lot about that in ours, and she goes on and has more comments about that episode and the others. So if you're on Facebook and you want to give us a like, go read them. But thank you, Monique, for popping in and finding us and communicating with us. We love having you around listening to us.
I second that. It's been great to see Monique's comments and to hear her insights on Enterprise. That's been fantastic. If you're on Facebook, definitely check it out. Some great thought-provoking Enterprise stuff from Monique. And if you'd like to continue the discussion with us or share any of your thoughts or picks, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Also, you can follow our show on Spotify, Google, Apple, and YouTube platforms. Abby, what's the best way to connect with you?
Best place to find me is on Twitter, and I'm at Abby M. Sommer. That's SOMMER.
And you can find me on Twitter also at ShuttlePod2, ShuttlePodTWO. We want to thank you again so much for spending this time with us, and we'll be back next time with Fallen Hero, the 22nd episode of Season 1. And be sure to tune into that one, as there's something very special about this episode that you will have to just wait to hear to find out.
Woohoo!
And as always, we leave you with this quote from our wonderful Captain Jonathan Archer. The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.